Good afternoon. Welcome to all attendees, including our presenters. My name is Adam Davey. I'm the CEO of the Winston Churchill Trust. We're based in Canberra, Ngunnawal country and Ngambri country. And I'm going to begin this information session giving you an overview of Churchill Fellowships, what they're about, how you apply and the sorts of things we're looking for. I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations people, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'd also like to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching this session and let you know that we do have a strong cohort and network of Indigenous Churchill Fellows. We're building this network and you're very much encouraged to engage with that network. If you want to find out more about that, please contact the Trust. A little bit of housekeeping. You will all be given the opportunity to ask questions and you can do that via the chat function. We'll answer the questions at the end, so after the two presenters following me have spoken. And if you miss your chance to put a question up, you can contact us directly via our website, or you can give our office a call, or you can even attend a future information session. We are running I think about 2 a week over the next few weeks. I'd also like to acknowledge, the very difficult times we're living through with the COVID pandemic here in Australia and, of course, globally. There's been, a lot of disruption and uncertainty, a lot of suffering and death related to the pandemic. And I hope that you're attending this session with a positive mindset and a hopeful outlook. And I know we've got many people online today who work in the community sector, and I'm sure you're doing great work and you're probably feeling pretty exhausted. So I hope this session gives you a sense of inspiration and something to look forward to. So a little bit of history. I'm often asked by people, where does the money come from to fund the Churchill Fellowships? And that's a very sensible question. When Sir Winston Churchill resigned as British Prime Minister in 1955, at 80 years of age, he'd served under 5 reigning monarchs. He'd survived 3 wars. He'd been a writer, an historian, a journalist, an adventurer, a painter. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. There was a widespread desire to honour Sir Winston Churchill and to capture the essence of his public service, his inspiration, his intellect, and even his humour for generations to come. Now, Sir Winston Churchill wasn't perfect, and you can read some insightful essays on our website that we've commissioned that explored Churchill through a contemporary lens. One thing is clear, though, he was a man who readily believed that anything was possible if you put your mind to it, and that the greatest figures in history were those who made a contribution to public service and their fellow countrymen. So when Prime Minister Menzies announced the news of Sir Winston's death to Australians in January 1965, he simultaneously announced the launch of a public fundraising appeal. And what's known as Churchill Memorial Sunday, 28th of February 1965, a door knock appeal was launched and over 220,000 Australians participated with support from the RSL. More than £2.2 million, so that's around $4 million, was raised, and that fundraising effort still remains one of the largest public fundraising efforts in Australia's history. So those funds have been added to by bequests and continue to be added to through donations, but largely the funds have been invested and we use the returns on those funds each year to fund Churchill Fellowships, and we award probably a bit over $3 million is the value of the fellowships we award each year. Another question that I'm often asked relates to the attributes of a Churchill Fellow. What sort of people are we looking for? Well, I think you can see on the slide there that Churchill Fellows are the types of people who are passionate and committed to a particular issue or a topic. They want to learn and share their knowledge so that others in our communities may benefit. I think, Churchill Fellows tend to share a lot of the attributes of Sir Winston Churchill, and that they, are determined and they just don't give up. And I think when we're interviewing people, we do tend to look for that passion, and it does shine through in most of our applicants. So a Churchill Fellowship is a unique and prestigious opportunity open to Australians from all walks of life. It's not an academic scholarship or a funding grant. And I think it's important to make that distinction. So you don't need to have any formal educational qualifications to be eligible for a Churchill Fellowship. You will see from year to year that we do award fellowships to people who have PhDs and other high-level qualifications, but equally we award them to people who are very much involved in the grassroots and don't necessarily have any qualifications. It's not a funding grant because we don't require you to quit every cent of the fellowship. We empower you. There's a lot of freedom for you to go out there and travel abroad and undertake your research in the way that you think works best for you. So it is very empowering, and the prestige of a Churchill Fellowship will open doors in other countries to people and organisations you might not otherwise be able to get a meeting with. But it's not just an overseas trip, it's a start of a lifelong journey and a contribution to make Australia better. So Churchill Fellowship doesn't end when you return from your travels and write a report or submit some kind of report. There's an ongoing role for you to play as a Churchill Fellow, and all Churchill Fellows tend to do that. So a Churchill Fellowship itself doesn't need to comprise formal research. You can learn new skills, undertake a course, build networks, observe best practice in your chosen field. The fellowship is for overseas travel only and must be for between 4 to 8 weeks taken in one continuous journey. There are a few little changes we've made for this year onwards, which I'll get to soon. We've awarded around 4,500 Churchill Fellowships since 1965, and each year we typically award or aim to award more than 100 across Australia. Churchill Fellows travel across the globe on the widest range and depths of topics and bring back to this country information, networks, projects, products, ideas, innovations, all of which make this country even stronger. You have to be an Australian citizen, or as of this year, you can be a permanent resident of Australia to be eligible to apply for a Churchill Fellowship. You do need to be aged over 18 by the application closing date. The ability to travel overseas is essential, and we can provide support for you if you have a disability, and that might, for example, involve taking a carer with you. We also now offer virtual research options for people who cannot travel due to disability or caring responsibilities. So if that's you, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us directly and discuss. Our application form doesn't have a part on it there to allow you to select that option because we've just introduced it, but it's something that's pretty exciting and does open up the doors to a Churchill Fellowship for more people than ever before. So please get in touch with us if that's you. And for people living in remote parts of Australia, we'll be allowing domestic travel soon. So again, if that's you, please contact us to discuss your situation. And that's recognising feedback we've had over the past few years that for some people living in remote and very remote parts of Australia, the challenge of travelling long distances is great, and the benefits of travelling within Australia to their community can also be quite profound. So a Churchill Fellowship is an individual project. It's not a team project. So if you work in a team environment, you can't apply as a team. I'm sorry, you need to apply as an individual. So please keep that in mind. It's possible to take someone else with you if appropriate, if you fund it or your organisation funds it. A good example from a couple of years ago is a Victorian Churchill Fellow his project was investigating Indigenous and cultural burning techniques for bushfire and land management. His employer paid for one of his Indigenous colleagues to join him on that trip, and that proved highly beneficial. And they've continued to work together to implement their findings. If you're undertaking tertiary studies, that's okay. However, your proposed project can't directly form part of that study, because we expect you to commit 100% to your Churchill Fellowship. Just to clarify that, if you're undertaking a study and you're proposing that you've finished your study by the time you're awarded your fellowship, then that's obviously fine because you're no longer studying. But what we don't want is for the Churchill Fellowship to be a little adjunct onto your real project, which is your university studies, because that's not what the Churchill Fellowship is for. So I really want you to hear, though, today that a Churchill Fellowship is an opportunity for people from all walks of life. And that's something that gets bandied around a lot. But for us, it's our mantra and has been for a long time. And we do mean it. In terms of the projects, your project must be suitable for a fellowship. And I guess in the broader sense, that means there must be some benefit to the Australian community in some way by you bringing back and sharing that knowledge, the ideas, the practices, or the skills that you learn. You also must demonstrate to us that you've fully explored your topic or issue within Australia to be considered for a Churchill Fellowship. And by that, what I mean is we don't want to pay to send you overseas to learn something you could have learned in Australia. And, it's fair to say that the assessors who will be reviewing your application will get online and they're pretty expert at searching on topics that might be something that isn't their expertise, but you can quickly find if there are people within Australia doing those things. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't already connected with people in Australia who are leading the way or doing things in your particular field of interest, maybe do that first before you apply. The project has to be a self-contained project. I mentioned it can't form part of a university degree or your studies. It also can't be partially funded by another organisation. So, we're not, an external travel budget department for whoever you work for or for another organisation. The Churchill Fellowship is an important thing on its own. It doesn't need to relate to your employment. So, your Churchill Fellowship might be on something that you're passionately involved with outside of work, and that's perfectly fine. It's also, obviously pretty common for people to apply for a Churchill Fellowship on a topic that relates to their work, because people tend to work and gravitate to roles that they're enthusiastic and passionate about, and that's obviously also fine. One bit of advice there is, if your proposed project relates directly to your employer or your employment, I'd recommend having a chat with your employer before you apply to sound them out in terms of their support for you. Will they give you some leave or some paid leave, those sorts of things, because that's definitely something that does happen. Equally, what can happen is people don't mention to their employer that they're doing it, they get awarded, and then they find out the employer's not too keen on them researching something that might not be aligning well with that organisation. And so just bear those things in mind quite carefully. We don't set limits on the topics or the issues. I think that's the beauty of a Churchill Fellowship. It really is up to you to come to us and convince us why the topic or issue that you're wanting to explore is of importance. So you do, design your own project. If you can think of a suitable topic, then really there are no limits. We do offer some sponsored fellowships, and this is where a generous individual or an organisation have agreed to fund a fellowship on a specific topic or from a particular geographical region, to be awarded to a fellow from a particular state or territory, for example. And we do have some fellowships that are in people's names. They've left a bequest, and again, that might have attached to it a particular topic or field of interest. So when you apply, you do get the option to select one or two of those sponsor fellowships if you think they relate to your topic or to you personally. Don't get too worried about that. We will also match people up to those. By selecting one or not selecting one, it won't alter you being considered for a Churchill Fellowship more broadly. So don't get too hung up on that. If you go to our website, you can look through the sponsored fellowships that are currently available, and that might be interesting for some of you as well. When framing your project, it's really important that you ask yourself, how will your work when you return benefit Australian society in some way? And that can be quite broad, in terms of how that might happen. It could range from, improving a particular service. It could be a cultural benefit through you sharing your particular skills or art or whatever it might be. So we're not telling you how that benefit looks. You need to tell us how that looks. So as you'd expect, you apply online. We've got an application form that you can access through our website, churchillfellowships.com.au, and you're able to log in, save, go away, come back, log in, save, keep doing that. You've got till the 28th of April. The way the system's set up is you don't get a password that you have to remember. You use your email address and you'll get sent a code every time you log in, and that saves you having to remember a particular password. You can only use the online application form. However, we don't want that to be a barrier to you. So if you have a disability or a reason why that form is not going to work for you, please get in contact with us and we'll work a way around that, because I don't want someone to be turned away because they couldn't fill out a form. Remember, you're competing against all the other applicants, and we typically get around 1,100 applications a year nationally. Think about how you're going to convince the selectors to invest in you and your project idea. You will need 2 referees, someone who can vouch for you personally, your aptitude, your skills, your experience, etc., and someone who can vouch for your topic. And that might be someone who has some credibility and authority, would expect, in your particular area of interest for your project. Top advice there is think about who those people might be and get in touch with them as soon as possible if you're applying this year. Don't leave that too late, because that's probably our number one stress factor as we get to the closing date for applications, is applicants calling and saying, oh my gosh, I can't get hold of my referee, they haven't submitted my reference. You won't be able to submit a late application, so you'll need to make sure you get on top of those referees as early as possible. Churchill Fellows tell us all the time that the process of actually writing the application really helps them to distill their ideas and to get really kind of laser focused on what it is they want to achieve. So again, get in early, create your application, start filling it out, and think about how you're going to articulate your ideas in your proposed project. So I guess the takeaway message there is don't leave it until the last minute, because it won't be your best application. You will be asked in your application to form an itinerary, and that's basically, which countries, which cities, which organisations do you want to go and travel to and meet with, and for how long. So think about carefully the most important destinations. Don't overcrowd your itinerary. So we don't expect you to go on a Churchill Fellowship for between 4 to 8 weeks and be working 24/7. We want you to have time factored into your itinerary to allow you to attend some of those meetings that you don't know you're going to have until you get there. And someone says, hey, why don't you meet with so-and-so? So factor in some time for you to arrive in your country, get over jet lag, go and enjoy yourself and understand the culture, have your meetings, have some time to do other meetings, time to travel to your next destination. Don't overcrowd it. You won't be able to travel to countries that Smart Traveller lists as places that are unsafe. We do provide travel insurance as part of the Churchill Fellowship as well. So in your itinerary, in your application, we won't expect you to have contacted individuals or organisations and confirm that they'll meet with you. That's probably a pretty big ask, given you're applying for something, you haven't got it yet. But we will ask you to have a pretty good idea of the organisations and potentially the people who you want to meet with and what you want to do there. And that might be, to interview them, it might be to do a course, it might be to do some observations, whatever it is that you're going to do. Of course, it's important to mention the impact of COVID on international travel. So as you'd appreciate, there's been precious little international travel over the last couple of years. We've had a pause effectively on Churchill Fellows travelling. We didn't hold a selection round last year. We've got about 200 plus Churchill Fellows gearing up to travel over the coming year. And that's pretty exciting. We've got some fellows leaving in the next couple of weeks. So the world is slowly opening up. With that, there comes some uncertainty still. I'm hoping that by 2023, when if you're successful, will travel, that it will be a bit more straightforward. It may never go back to what it was pre-COVID, but certainly it should be a little bit easier. You don't need to be fully vaccinated to apply for a Churchill Fellowship, but you will need to comply with whatever rules are in place in Australia and other countries to travel. So we expect you to be able to travel. So if you don't think you're able to comply with the rules that allow you to travel internationally, then probably not worth applying for a fellowship. There may be some challenges with face-to-face interviews, depending on how the pandemic continues this year, but we'll manage that at the time. And we have the option of video interviews if we need to. So in terms of the selection process, look, we have selection committees and panels across the country, one in each state and territory. We draw from different sectors and across the community, people with high range experience on a range of different issues. So they'll be assessing your applications. As I said, there's a shortlisting process and you may get an interview. Recommendations will then go to our board and the announcement will be made if you're successful in September. If you don't get shortlisted to an interview, you'll find out well before then. If you go to our website, you'll see there is a timeline available and where there are selection interview dates already chosen, they'll be listed on the website for you to see. So I often ask for tips on the application process, and I guess another good tip I can give you is to just really read and address the selection criteria. Don't try and write too much. The application form has some pretty strict word limits, so you're going to need to learn to be succinct and precise. Don't use jargon, because if you've got a topic where the people reading it don't understand the intricacies of your particular issue and you're using jargon and acronyms, that's going to make it very difficult for them to understand what your project's about. So remember, it's a very competitive process. There's no reason to be shy. Put the most effort you can into your application. We actually tend to get about 2,000 applications started each year, and a bit under half of those people who start don't submit their application. And we've surveyed people, and what we tend to find is people lose their nerve a bit and think, oh, maybe I'm not quite ready. So, I'd encourage you to back yourself and to be confident. You might not get Churchill Fellowship on your first application. You might, some people do, might take 2, perhaps 3 attempts. But, the most important thing is to be confident in yourself. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. You'll see on that slide our office phone number. We're a small team, but there's always someone there during business hours to answer your questions. And as I said, you can go to our website to find a lot more information and, of course, the application form. So I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, Sharon Goff. She's a West Australian who was awarded her fellowship in 2016. Sharon received the Department for Child Protection and Family Support Churchill Fellowship, as it was known at the time, to investigate programs for young people leaving care that prevent homelessness. Sharon has a background in youth work with a particular focus on promoting educational and participation pathways for young people with complex needs. And Sharon is the CEO of Indigo Junction, a place-based homelessness service situated in the North East Metro Perth region. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sharon.
Good morning, everybody. I'm having some IT issues at this end, so I'm going to share my screen, but yeah, it seems that whatever barrier I can encounter this morning, that's what's happening. So I will just roll with it the way it is, if that's okay. So yeah, my Churchill Fellowship basically was around young people experiencing homelessness. That has essentially been within the care system. I travelled to New Zealand and to Canada across 8 weeks, and probably a couple of years ago now. So yeah, so essentially many of you may not know that probably as much as 40% of young people that have been in the care of child protection exit that system into homelessness within the first year of leaving care. So quite often that can be between kind of 15 and 18 years old. We obviously work in homelessness services, and that was really alarming to us. And we were keen to kind of explore international practice around, I guess, countries and programs and services that might be able to inform us and, I guess, provide better outcomes for young people. So essentially, I guess, Canada was of particular interest to me, just in the Calgary in particular. I've been kind of tracking some of their outcomes, and certainly their homelessness service system and programs seem to be providing a whole lot better outcomes for young people. And then also just the cohort of young people, given the proportion of young Aboriginal people in care was really very similar to Australia, so it was definitely of interest. And yeah, essentially just the experience around residential schools for young people within, or I guess within their history, was very, very similar to Australia, and some of our stolen generation issues, and I guess the correlation between the percentage of young people in care being predominantly Aboriginal, both in Canada and Australia. So what was kind of happening at the time was that our kind of homelessness service system was under reform, and I guess to kind of match that, the out-of-home care system was also undergoing significant change and reform. And there were kind of snippets of information coming through that kind of Calgary homelessness service system approach, and predominantly housing first. So housing first, for those of you, is about providing kind of no preconditional barriers to people needing homelessness response. So yeah, it was just a really kind of fortunate time that was kind of happening in Western Australia and in Australia, and I was provided the opportunity to go and have a look firsthand. In terms of the policy reform, there was also a 10-year strategy to end homelessness. So there was a lot of consultation happening around the sector, and I've touched on the out-of-home care. So I guess within our area of work, that will mean a lot of opportunities to hear from the sector in terms of how that policy should be formed. So there was, I guess, great currency and relevance to the information that I was able to provide. I recall like being at a sector forum and coming back, and I guess they were just starting that thinking and just feeling really excited about what I could offer into that space. So yeah, I was provided a range of opportunities. I think your dissemination strategy is really important, and I got really nervous about how I might deliver on that. But I think just even the fact that you've done a Churchill Fellowship, people are very excited to hear about what that might provide in terms of improving the way things work. And I was invited to attend the YACWA, which is the Youth Affairs Council for Western Australia. It's the peak, and provide a keynote, I guess, on what I'd learnt. And yeah, just the outcomes of that are really exciting. People are really excited about, you know, I guess what I was able to share. And yeah, really kind of change, I guess, from a strategic level right down to people that were youth workers on the ground. It really created a lot of energy and interest in terms of how we might improve what we were doing. So in particular, I think with our system in terms of homelessness services, have got very risk adverse, and a lot of what we might do is come up with lots of reasons why we can't just bring people in out of the shelter and provide a homelessness response. So some examples of that, we're going to you know, places like Calgary or Vancouver, where the weather really justifies what the response needs to be, because people will die if they're left out in the weather because it's so extreme. So as a consequence, their whole, I guess, approach in terms of welcoming people into their services needed to, that was, you know, the core of what they were trying to do, is keep people safe. So yeah, it really kind of changed some of our thinking around, yeah, I guess bringing down some of those barriers around providing a response to homelessness. In terms of the application, I need to say I became quite obsessed about the application. I think I drove my family insane. But essentially, I kept it really simple and accessible. So I even got other people to test my application that knew nothing about my topic, to just be really certain that it was really clear and accessible, because we do get really caught up in jargon. Yeah, definitely back up the claims within your application with really solid evidence. And I did plan my dissemination kind of strategy, and I also made contact with a lot of people around service visits. So I researched a lot. To be honest, I came up with this insane itinerary to start with, and ended up cutting it in half when I realised that it just wasn't achievable in terms of, like, I guess, just the quality rather than the quantity of what I wanted to achieve. And I think to also be mindful that you're very likely to be arriving in locations where you've never been before. So to just give yourself time to settle into where you are. But for me, even New Zealand and for Canada, to immerse yourself in the culture, because it's really informative in terms of your actual report to understand, I guess, just to kind of create that depth in your understanding about your topic and where you are. I started talking to people, and some of them I didn't go and see, obviously, because there was too many. But I think it just opened up discussions that I probably wouldn't have had. And I think part of that, I needed to just be really brave. I remember Sue Benson was my mentor, and she said, you need to be bold. And I think that was really important. I remember going back to that, because you feel really, I guess self-doubt would creep in about whether I was, able to achieve what I was setting out to achieve. And I think really, if you keep your topic in mind, that was probably a really important thing for me, that it wasn't actually about me. It was about the young people and the policy and the outcomes that we could achieve if I was able to go. What was really important to me was writing the report as it happened, just in terms of the currency and the content of what I learnt. I really think if I'd waited to do that when I'd returned, I may have lost a lot of really valuable insights and information. And in terms of what I guess the Churchill Trust has been amazing in that, just the profile and its reputation. Like people, like I touched on, I was really concerned about my dissemination strategy, and I didn't need to be. People actually approached me and came to me around how, I might, kind of attend different conferences and different things. So that went on for a long time, far exceeding my expectations. So that's all from me.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. Sorry, it took me an extra second to get my camera back on there.
As long as it wasn't.
That's fantastic. And look, if you've got any questions as you digest Sharon's presentation there, feel free to add them to the Q&A. We'll address them at the end. So I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Angela Rintoul. She is a 2018 awarded Churchill Fellow from Victoria. And Angela's project was to investigate international lessons for public health policy and improved regulation of gambling. Hi, Angela. Angela is a senior research fellow at Federation University, Gippsland campus, and a doctor of public health with an interest in unhealthy commodity industries. Her work focuses on how to minimise preventable illness and reduce inequities. Angela's research has found that under current arrangements, gambling accelerates inequity and inequality. Angela was also appointed a full member of the newly established WHO expert group on gambling, which is pretty exciting. So I'm going to not steal Angela's thunder. I'll let her tell you all about her great work.
Thanks so much, Adam, and thanks everyone for inviting me to reflect and share my amazing Churchill experience. I'll just go to full screen if I can here. So as Adam mentioned, I looked at international lessons for reducing gambling harm and looking at countries that were able to, sorry, I'll just change the view of my screen here. That's not quite right. It's not letting me. Yeah, so
that's right.
Is that all right? Can you see?
It works fine.
Okay, great. So I was fortunate enough to have the support of my family to do this. I think I've put a little photo of my partner and child up here just because anything that I guess takes you away from home for an extended period of time, it's really helpful to have family on board. I had a 7-month-old at the time that we left, and we were fortunate that my partner was able to take over as primary carer for the 2 months that I was basically doing the data collection in country, and they came with me. So that was a really kind of different experience to what I had originally thought might happen on a Churchill Fellowship, but we made it work. So we travelled to, it was basically 11 different locations. I think it was 7 or 8 countries I've listed here. And I selected these countries partly because they had different types of regulation for gambling, and they also had different kind of levels of experience with and success in reform of gambling. And I met with a range. Basically most of my fellowship was around conducting interviews, and that was really with a range of people from lived experience groups to regulators, politicians, other researchers, gambling operators and advocates for reform. And some of the highlights were really just the incredible access that the backing of the Churchill Fellowship can give you to opening doors to policy leaders in other countries. It was fortunate that at the time that I was visiting the WHO in Geneva, they were also contemplating ways to set up a global program on gambling and gambling disorder. And that was a really fortuitous and serendipitous kind of timing of my visit. And I'll talk a little bit later about that, how that led to the first global meeting on gambling later in the year in Turkey. But also one of the key revelations for me, just being in such a diverse range of countries in such a short period of time and really immersing myself in their experience with gambling reform, was the power of lived experience in generating momentum for policy change. In particular, in the UK, I met with a group called Gambling with Lives, who are the family of bereaved people who've been bereaved by gambling-related suicide. And they had really launched an incredibly successful campaign through the media with an all-party parliamentary group, so getting bipartisan support across the British Parliament for reform. And when I visited London at the time, there'd just been the introduction of a significant change. So they've got these fixed odds betting terminals, which are basically electronic roulette terminals. And they'd managed to achieve a reduction from a £100 per spin bet to a £2 per spin bet. And that was, you know, we've had a similar push in Australia to try and reduce the maximum bet on a poker machine to $1. That hasn't succeeded yet, per spin, that is. And so that was really exciting to basically watch that significant reform unfold there. But another highlight really was, and somewhat unexpected, I suppose, was it wasn't just an opportunity for me to learn from others in these countries. It was also it became apparent that people were inviting me when I came to visit their school or their university department or the regulator's office in Norway. They were inviting me to provide presentations to their staff as well. So it was really an opportunity for a mutual exchange of ideas and a great way to have these kind of discussions that are really difficult to have when you're just reading journal articles or attending a conference, for instance. It was interesting. Some of the unexpected things that happened were when I arrived in Norway. I just arrived from the UK, and it was a strange sense that when I met some of my first interview participants, who were mainly academic researchers, they thought it was kind of novel that I was coming to talk to them about gambling, because it was sort of something that they'd resolved largely in their mind. And this is because Norway's had this incredible campaign in 2007 where they recalled all of their video lottery terminals, so they're like poker machines, and replaced them with a government monopoly that had very low intensity machines that had all of these harm reduction features on top of them. So they had maximum loss limits and universal limits, so you couldn't lose anything more than around $400 a month on these machines. And so really the problem of gambling had become much more marginal in Norway, and that was a little bit of a surprise. But as the week progressed, I managed to have meetings with regulators and operators, and of course there were new issues that were arising. But certainly because of these protections that they had in place for people who gamble, they really weren't at the level that they had been in the early 2000s. I mentioned earlier the momentum for reform in Britain. So that was the complete opposite of my experience in Norway the week after. So they were moving on from this great win to have seen such a significant reduction in the maximum bet allowed on quite harmful machines, to moving on to having limits on online gambling. And there seemed to be building momentum, and the remit of this all-party parliamentary group had now been shifted to a new area of policy concern within the country. So it was really growing, and they're actually undertaking a whole review of the Gambling Act now in Britain at the moment. So there's still plenty of opportunities there for reducing harm. Another revelation, I suppose, was just realising that when I was talking to people about the issues that Australia has, we have our largest sort of losses on community-based electronic gambling machines. And so when I was talking to people, say in Sweden, about this, they said, oh, we always found it really strange why Australians keep talking about poker machines when we go to conferences, because there's such a marginal issue here. And that was really largely because they've introduced online slots and casinos. And I guess it's sometimes not until you go to the country that you kind of have that revelation about the different laws and implications for availability of different products, and how that really affects the areas of interest and concern in those contexts. Another comment I would make would be to not necessarily limit yourself to the usual groups that you might usually meet with in Australia when you're preparing your list of people that you'd like to meet. So obviously the politics are very different in different contexts and cultures and countries, and I'd recommend going wide when considering meetings. So for instance, I had some really valuable meetings with gambling operators in Norway and Finland. Typically in Australia, gambling operators are less interested in talking to researchers. But in Norway and Finland, they have a government monopoly on the provision of gambling, and they were quite open in their discussions and quite relatively advanced in terms of the measures that they'd introduced to reduce harm. I guess some of the lessons and the outcomes for both the topic and for me in terms of undertaking this Churchill Fellowship were really clarifying the strength of lived experience-led reform. And I think many of us who work in the community sector already know this, but it really, as an academic, it really was evident in the UK in particular, and in historically in Norway, that it was people really humanising the harm and the damage that gambling had on their lives and the lives of those around them, that actually spurred politicians on to act. And that often it was because there was obviously bipartisan support for reform that enabled them to introduce those measures that were going to help reduce harm. In terms of just general practical outcomes, it's led to my involvement in the WHO group on gambling, and I was later supported in December 2019 through the WHO to attend their first meeting in Istanbul. And that again was another really fascinating experience, because I hadn't really been exposed to countries where gambling is prohibited and how they are responding to that. And so Turkey, obviously, and some of the other Islamic countries in that region had very different perspectives, and it was really great to learn more about how gambling is kind of presenting there and gambling harm. I've also been invited to be a commissioner on the Lancet Public Health Commission on Gambling, which is underway at the moment, and that's really exciting because I think this issue has really been elevated in the medical journals finally as being a public health issue of concern. I also managed to do the first presentation at WHO on gambling in Geneva when I was there, and that was really exciting because it's just quite a new program of work for the WHO. And I've had a number of other kind of opportunities to disseminate the results through journals and the conversation since then. I'd say the best thing about being a fellow really is the endorsement and support of the Churchill Trust in lending credibility both to your topic and to you in terms of opening doors. And since I've returned, I've been really grateful for the opportunity to take part in a number of additional programs that the Churchill Fellowship runs. So as Adam mentioned earlier, it's not just this 4 to 8 week period that you spend in country. You actually come back, and it can be like a continuing program of growth for you and your topic to figure out ways to continue to progress the reform agenda. So I've been taking part in the virtual global leadership practices program last year, and I'm currently undertaking the policy impact program. And also in doing that, you continue to have contact with other Churchill Fellows who are obviously a really inspiring and exciting group of people. In terms of preparing for your application, there's just a few comments I'll make. Sharon made some really helpful comments already. Basically, don't underestimate the time to prepare it and refine it and revise it. Obviously, ask friends and colleagues to critique it if you can. When planning some of the logistics in country, as Adam said, pace yourself. I tried to limit my movement to one country per week. Obviously, it depends if you're in the US or Canada and you're covering a lot of territory, that's a bit different. I was mostly in Europe and Scandinavia, so that was more feasible. Don't feel like you have to fill up your entire day with meetings, because by the time you look up the train schedule and figure out where you're going to meet the person and prepare your questions ahead of time, etc., you really probably don't want to be having more than 2 meetings a day. And you also want to be able to have some time to build in your writing time for your report and your reflections. And just another point to consider, seasonality. So I undertook my fellowship in February, March, early April, so it was an 8-week trip. And I think that was a good time because obviously people in the Northern Hemisphere tend to be on leave in July, August, and so people were more likely to be available for meetings. During that time, it was a bit of a cold time, not an ideal time in terms of whether to be travelling, but a good time in terms of being able to catch people for meetings. And sometimes you'd get recommendations for other people to meet when you're in country, and you might be setting them up, the day before you're trying to meet someone. So you're more likely to be able to catch them if you're there during winter. And just don't underestimate the time commitment that you will likely want to provide when you're undertaking your fellowship. So, there's really a bit of effort involved, even after obviously you've prepared your application, you've nominated some people that you're intending to meet in each destination, but that list will obviously grow substantially when you actually are awarded the fellowship and come to set up meetings in country. And obviously you need to factor in time when you get back to finalise your report. I ended up doing an ethics application before I travelled, because I'm a researcher. It was appropriate for me to do that, but not everyone will need to do that. And back up your report. I actually lost my report the day before it was due. My computer just died, which was, I thought, almost impossible and unheard of. And I had Dropbox, but I realised Dropbox hadn't been syncing for 3 months and I hadn't noticed. So I had to rewrite my report in 5 days, which was not ideal, but so just remember to back it up. That's all. I'll leave that there. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much, Angela. And we are nice people, so the dog ate your homework. We can we can try and help out with extra time. So look, we've got a few questions, and thanks. Most people have stayed on, which is excellent. We're getting close to the end of time. I'll work through them, and then Sharon or Angela, if there's something there for you as well, please feel free to turn your cameras on or leave them on if you want. It's fine. So the first question is about the application itself and the project overview section. Can I clarify what's intended by the project? Is the project the Churchill Fellowship research, what you want to look at and study overseas, or the larger project that could result? It's the first one. So it's your Churchill Fellowship project. That's what we want you to describe. Can you provide examples of good quality project aims and project descriptions? Look, I'll probably suggest jump on our website and have a look at some of the reports from Fellows to get a good sense of that. I mean, just off the top of my head, if it helps you understand that in some way, it might be a project aim, might be to build into a TAFE environment Italian patisserie training, because there's a shortage of that. And your project description, that might be to travel to Italy to undertake a 4-week course in Italian patisserie, and bring that knowledge back to then establish a course and to train more people to deliver that course, something like that. So it doesn't have to be overly complex in how you word it, just quite clear what it is you're wanting to do and why. If there are itinerary stops you're not sure will solidify, should you include that in your application and remove it later if it doesn't come to fruition? Look, effectively, yes. That's always going to happen because you can't see into the future in terms of what may or may not be available in terms of people or organisations. So I think, map out, again, the most important people and places that you want to go to on your fellowship. How advanced should arrangements be made to host? For example, if you're undertaking research at sites half far down the road of obtaining institutional permissions, ethics for fieldwork, and do you need letters of support? No, I think I covered that earlier. So, you don't need to have spoken to organisations or institutions or people and confirm them for the purpose of your application. I would suggest that if you get an interview and you've put some pretty high profile organisations or people down, and it might draw the question, really, are they going to meet with you? It's probably worthwhile to at least have been able to say, look, I've explored the possibility, and absolutely this organisation does accept international visitors for this type of thing. I haven't approached them yet, but I know they do it. There will be some occasions when, look, maybe just through your own networks or happenstance, you are able to confirm that. That's fine as well. If you say, look, I've spoken to them, if I get a fellowship, they'd love to meet with me, that's also okay. But we don't expect you to, effectively waste potentially your time and their time lining things up that far in advance. The guidelines state referees should preferably be an AU citizen. Can I use an NZ person who's been? Yes, well, if that person is the best person and they're not an Australian citizen, I think that's okay. We prefer, obviously, for context, people who are in Australia and understand the benefits of your work, proposed work to Australia, but in some cases they might not be an Australian citizen, and that's okay. A good question now, is there a preference for local projects or more ambitious, big national projects? Well, hate to say it, but it depends. I don't think there's a preference. It certainly really depends on the type of project and what you're doing. So it might be something that is quite discreet in terms of the particular community or group that will benefit. It might be something that can be of national consequence or impact. It might be both. And that's really up to you to articulate. So maybe you say, look, initially I can see this being something I do in my state, but if successful, then I would anticipate it's something that could be potentially having national impact. So it really depends. But you'll see, if you look at our website, we award fellowships to big and small, I guess, in terms of the focus of the impact in Australia. Do you have any advice on preparing a plan to disseminate your results once you return to Australia? Well, that's where you come in as an applicant. You will be asked, tell us how you're going to share these findings. I guess my best advice is don't simply say, well, in addition to providing a report, which is an obligation of your fellowship, and I'll just add, that could be a video, a podcast. It doesn't have to be a written report. If you think of a good way to engage with your potential target audience there, that's up to you. But don't say simply, I'll get a journal article, because we're investing a lot of money in an overseas project here. It's probably worth more than just a journal article. So think about the various stakeholders and ways that you can communicate with people. We do have a pretty decent induction process. And as part of that, in the last few years, we've introduced a communication training segment, and we bring in an external communication expert who help you sit down and think about, who should I talk to before I leave, while I'm on my trip, when I return, what are their preferred communication channels, what's the best time for me to communicate this, who else might be interested. So we do provide some kind of support and training on that as well, but you'll need to have a think about that for your application. Tips on referees. Well, look, aim high, would be my advice. If you can get the head of an organisation as opposed to a colleague, that's where I'd start. If they are an expert or someone with credibility on your topic, obviously it needs to be for the personal referee, someone who knows you or knows you well enough to be able to support you as being the right kind of person to do the project. Would it be possible to have the contact details to join the First Nations group? Good question. We don't really have contact details. We've got a meeting next Tuesday, but that's for Churchill Fellows. Can I suggest, Karen, if you perhaps send an email to us, or you can send one to me directly if you like. It's adam.davey@churchilltrust.com.au, and what I can do is connect you with some of our fellows perhaps that way, and maybe there's I can look at what state you come from as well and find the best people to connect you with. Next question, you can start travel from 1st of Feb 2023, but when is the latest you can travel? We typically give fellows a 12-month window. That's been blown apart with COVID, and we've just extended people by 1 or 2 years at least because of the challenges of travel. But normally we expect you to depart Australia within 12 months of that initial date of February 2023. Sometimes things happen in your life and that were unplanned, and you might have an illness or something like that, in which case we can be flexible and give people an extension on that time. A question about it's not a scholarship, just to confirm, the fellowship level of support. Look, it's hard to say because of COVID. Yeah, 28,000 was the average last time we ran around. My fingers crossed it's not a lot more than that now with post or during COVID kind of international travel. We cost the fellowships based on your exact proposed itinerary. So they're all very bespoke. I've seen them as low as $12,000 for a 4-week fellowship to New Zealand. I've seen them as high as $40,000 where someone's gone to New York, which is notoriously expensive, and Europe, and quite a long 8-week trip. So really what controls those costs for us is the fact that it's between 4 and 8 weeks. I personally think the average is not that useful number either, but it doesn't really matter to you. What you need to know is that if you're successful, we fund your airfares, we calculate an overseas living allowance based on the exchange rates in the places you're going to, so you get an allowance that allows you to pay for your accommodation, your food, all that kind of stuff, and you book your travel through a central travel agent we have on board, so you can be looked after while you're traveling, and your insurance is all covered. So really the dollar figure is kind of irrelevant in that sense. It's all covered for you. All right. is it more or less desirable to return to a place, a program you already had experience with to explore through a different lens? Not quite sure I fully understand that question. If you've already been overseas and met with an organisation, the question is going to be, why do you want us to pay for you to go back? I guess, to put it bluntly, if that's what you mean. But just because you've been somewhere before doesn't mean, you know, we'd rule that out, but you just need to explain, why do you need to go back there again? And how's the Churchill Fellowship going to make it different this time? How much emphasis is there on innovative concepts? Well, I think it's kind of inherent, really, in the Churchill Fellowship projects that you're wanting to go overseas to learn more about something that's getting different results to what maybe is being done here or is done differently somehow. And I think inherently innovation is probably going to be part of that. So I think it's kind of an underlying concept there. You know, if something's not particularly innovative, novel or different, then, you know, the question again would be, in a very competitive process, well, why would you be the one selected? Is it possible to do a mix of both attending a training and conducting research? Yes, it is, absolutely. So it might be that there's a 2-week course on, you know, wood carving or something that you want to do, and then there's some other research you want to do in the same country or other countries, and that's really fine. You just need to set that out in your application, and yeah, no problem with that at all. So that probably brings us to the end of the time we had available. A few people have now had to go. So any further questions, yep, go to our website, give the team a call. Love to hear from you. And if you're going to apply, good luck. Thank you.